Welcome to Groton Matters, where we look at important issues, we examine them in depth, in a fair, balanced, and thorough manner, all in the interest of making informed decisions. My name is Jack Petropoulos. I'm your host here today, and the matter of the day is the proposed removal of the words Holy Bible from the town seal. We'll take a look at both the history of the town seal, how it came to be, and various considerations for and against making the proposed change. You'll see an index of the various points of our discussion here and the timestamps associated with those parts of the show. And feel free to fast forward to those parts or to use this index to go backwards to them if there's something you want to see again. There's really no way to look at the town seal without trying, especially to consider making changes to it, without understanding the history of the seal. And so to help us to understand the history of the seal, we have Joshua Volmar, who's going to help us to understand how the seal came to be and some of the aspects around that history. Josh is a student at University of Massachusetts at Lowell. He's a dual major, majoring in both history and business administration. He's lived in Groton all his life, and he's been interested in history for a long time as well, actually since before high school. He got charged up by a visit to Newport, Rhode Island to go see the mansions down there. After graduating from high school, he took a year off and worked at the Groton History Center. During that time, and he continues to do this, he's made innumerable presentations here in town and written wonderful articles for the Herald. He's accumulated and demonstrated a wonderful history of, or a wonderful understanding of Groton's history. I'd like to welcome emerging Groton historian, Joshua Volmar.
Thank you for having me.
You're more than welcome. Thank you for coming. You know what? I want to be clear that Josh was here to help us with one thing, and really that's just to understand the history of our town seal and how it came to be. Joshua has taken no position one way or the other, should we or shouldn't we make this change. And I'd hate for folks to think that he's making that argument. And I want to have you really understand that Joshua's just here to help us to understand what happened and what led to the seal that we have today. So with that said, Joshua, why don't we start off with the when and the why of it all? When did this happen and why did it happen?
Yeah, so we do have a fair amount of documentation around the creation of the town seal. So the town seal was created in 1898 because of a state requirement. At the time, it was known that Massachusetts was going to pass a law requiring all towns to adopt a seal if they did not already have one. The law ultimately was passed the next year, 1899, and Groton did not already have a seal, and I have found no record of there being a previous seal of the town, and so therefore the town needed to create a seal in response to this incoming law.
I see. So they had a mandate, a state mandate, which is, we get plenty of today, but it's interesting to hear that happened back then. How did the town, which was already 200 years old at the time, go about doing this 120 years ago today?
Yeah, so at town meeting in 1897, a committee was appointed to bring a recommendation on a design for the seal to town meeting in 1898. And the committee consisted of Francis Marion Boutwell, son of our renowned Governor George Boutwell, Charles Woolley, and local businessman Michael Sheedy Jr., who was the chair. Before the committee spent much time considering the task, they were contacted by Dr. Samuel Abbott Green, who wanted to propose a design. And Dr. Green today is best remembered as the most prolific Groton historian, and at the time he was very well known and well respected. He was considered something of a favorite son of Groton. Although he was a native of Groton, he lived primarily in Boston and maintained his family home on Main Street as a sort of vacation house. He had heard of the need for a town seal, and being well acquainted with the town's history, which was the inspiration for many seals being created at the time, he decided to propose a design and offered to pay all costs associated with creating it if it was accepted. And the donation of funds shows that Green was certainly no average Grotonian. He would certainly have been considered elite. He was a Harvard-educated physician who at one time served as mayor of Boston. His father was also a Harvard-educated physician, while his mother was a sister of the famous Lawrence brothers, Amos, Abbott, and William, who were some of the wealthiest people in the country at the end of their lives. In sum, Dr. Green really couldn't have been better connected, and he was also possessed of a sizable fortune.
Interesting. So not only was it a mandate, it was an unfunded mandate, and Green had both the influence and the wealth to sort of inject himself into that. And he also had the knowledge of the history to make him a reliable and an attractive resource for coming up with a new seal. So what made him believe that his was the right design?
Dr. Green actually explained his design in a brief letter to the committee. He considered it to be appropriately simple and, to use his words, quote, to typify the character of the inhabitants, end quote. He explained that the plow represented, quote, the general occupation of the people, end quote, both the early English settlers and many of his contemporaries. The Bible, he said, represented the faith of the early settlers, and showing the attitude of the time, he stated, quote, throughout Christendom today, it is the cornerstone of religion and morality. In sum, he believed that the plow and Bible represented important aspects of life, both to the early settlers of Groton and his contemporaries.
So according to Green, the plow and the Bible were symbols that sort of had endured for the first 2 centuries of Groton's existence, which is kind of compelling. Was he right? To what extent did the plow and the Bible really represent Groton?
So in 1898, a large portion of the population was still engaged in farming, whether it was their primary or secondary occupation. On the 1900 census, of the 479 houses in Groton, 106 were reported to be owned in conjunction with a farm, and many people who did not own a farm worked on somebody else's farm. Of course, there were many types of farmers in Groton, from subsistence farmers all the way up to millionaires who owned large estates and employed dozens of community members to farm them. But if the plow can be considered to represent the farming community, then it was a fairly accurate representation of the town in 1898. Going back to the early days of town settlement, much more of the population were farmers. While they would have also used plows, the plow pictured on the town seal was contemporary to 1898 and would have been used in Groton at that time, not in the early years of the town settlement. As for the Bible, of the town's population of 2,052 in 1900, the best estimate that we can come up with is that only 2 of them were not Christian. Of course, we don't actually have statistics about who believed what, but we do have population statistics based on race. So in 1900, there were 22 Black residents of Groton, 1 Japanese resident, and 1 Chinese resident, and the rest were white. And it is unlikely that many of the white or Black residents did not consider themselves to be Christian, whether they actually actively practiced the religion or not. But on the other hand, it is likely that the Japanese resident and the Chinese resident were not Christian because they had recently immigrated to the US, and Christianity is, of course, not the dominant religion in either China or Japan. Therefore, the Bible did represent the vast majority of the town in 1898. Further back, it would have even more uniformly represented the town. In the colonial period, like most Massachusetts towns, Groton was dominated by the Calvinist Puritan ideology for which the colony had been founded in the first place. There was only 1 church in town, which later evolved into the First Parish Church, and it was expected that everybody would attend. But moving back to the time when the period when the seal was created, it was also true that even then, in 1898, neither the plow nor the Bible represented all of the town.
I see. Well, but nonetheless, a pretty sizable portion, certainly even at that time. And with that kind of representation, it's hard to imagine there was really any objection to this design that he offered. What was it universally approved?
Great question. So we have no record of there being any opposition or any other proposed design. The Committee on the Seal unanimously recommended Dr. Green's design to town meeting, and on April 4th, 1898, town meeting unanimously adopted it and voted also to send their thanks to Dr. Green for paying all of the expenses associated with creating it. And there has been no change in the seal since then.
That's great. I think that gives us a good background in this. I want to thank you very much, Joshua. Thanks for your help. And again, thank you for just being right down the middle and giving us important information that we can then use to leverage our opinions going forward to the extent that history is useful. I want to wish you good luck with your studies and your efforts to help us all to understand more about the background and our history here at Groton. It's been very educating and useful for me to listen to many of the things that you've said. Much of what Joshua has told us comes from his studies, and he's got reference documentation, which I'll post on grotonmatters.com in case you're interested in seeing why Joshua has said some of these things were true. So with that said, Joshua, thanks very much for your help on this.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so with that great background from Joshua, now we're on to sort of the meat of the discussion, which is about the proposed article, which was to be for town meeting, but will now go to the ballot, which is a question of whether or not to remove the words Holy Bible from the book in the center of the town seal. Now you can see the article here as it's written, but the core question is, shall we take the written words Holy Bible off the seal and leave it otherwise unchanged? Here to help me evaluate this question are two individuals, one representing each side of this discussion. The first is Deirdre Slavin Mitchell. Deirdre lives in town here, has a BA from Hobart College and a master's in public health from Boston University. She's been here for 26 years with her husband, Richard, and they've raised their two daughters here. She's served on innumerable boards and committees, including the Groton Community School, Habitat for Humanity. She was the chair of the Republican Town Committee for a while. She's currently part of the Groton Business Association, the Groton Civil Discourse Project, and the chair of the Groton Housing Authority. She's here today in her capacity as a member of the Groton's Diversity Task Force, representing the reasons that we might want to change the wording on the seal. Representing the argument to keep the seal as it is today is John Valentine. John's lived in New England all his life, and he and his wife downsized from Harvard, moving to Groton in 2015. He practiced law since 1975, starting out in corporations and moving to private practice. He's now semi-retired, loves living in the Lost Lake community. He's not representing any single entity, but I've known John for many years. I know him to be a thoughtful and balanced and well-spoken debater, and so I'm pleased and grateful to have him here representing the argument for why we should keep the seal as it is today. So with that said, I'd like to ask each of them to give us their thoughts, high level, on this issue, and then we'll start to dive into some of the questions that members of the community have provided that I think are important to ask. So why don't we start off with Deirdre, as you are representing the motion to change the wording on the town seal.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jack, and thanks for having me on today. I joined the Diversity Task Force in July of 2021 as a representative from the Groton Civil Discourse Project. I was on the steering committee of the Civil Discourse Project, as well as the chair of the Groton Housing Authority. And I'd also, as you said, been the chair of the Republican Town Committee. The Groton Diversity Task Force was created in September of 2020. The task force is comprised of a diverse group of individuals representing the different voices and views within the town. Members represent town employees, the ADA community, Lawrence Academy, Council on Aging, just to name a few. Back in 2017, a warrant article came before the town meeting asking to form a 5-member committee to receive public input into the design for a new town seal. This warrant ended up being defeated. In 2021, when I joined the Diversity Task Force, I asked to be on the Town Image Subcommittee, which had already been formed. This committee was already looking at different areas in town that might be problematic, such as town signs and the town seal. I specifically asked to join this committee because since the original 2017 warrant, I was completely against making any changes to the seal. In the months that followed, our subcommittee looked at all parts of the seal and questioned each and every part. We scoured historical documents to educate ourselves to the history of the seal and try to understand Dr. Green's intent. We spent hours of thoughtful conversation understanding that changes to the seal would inflame passions on both sides. But ultimately, what we recommended was a change that is both measured and conservative while preserving history. We believe that by preserving the majority of the seal, it will honor Groton's history and those who came before us. But we understand that Groton is now a more diverse, complex tapestry of religion as well as culture. And while acknowledging the words Holy Bible are not offensive, we recommend the removal of these words to make the seal more representative of today's Groton while keeping the majority of the seal intact. Thank you.
Thank you. John, what are your thoughts on this initiative?
Boy, it's a tough issue. If we're going to have a new seal today and there's no precedent for it, I don't think it'd be drawn up the way it is. but it is what it is, and it's part of our town history. And the proposal coming as it has after it was first rejected soundly in that town meeting, I think it was 2018, but is a gut punch. I can't describe in words because it was an emotional reaction when it came to listening to this proposal for the first time. I understand the rationale. I understand the thought behind it, but in fact, it doesn't do what it's intended to do. I think the overall goal of the diversity task force is to make this town a better, more harmonious, more tolerant place to live. But the proposal is destructive, contentious, intolerant, and divisive. It needs to be turned down at the ballot box. It needs to be rejected at the town meeting. You know, no one decides to live in a town because of its seal. The seal does nothing by itself to bring about diversity, true diversity in the town. Striking out the words Holy Bible in particular is, as the task force apparently thought it could be, you know, a very, very strong statement. You know, it's a purely symbolic act. What's it symbolic for? You know, does it symbolize removing something offensive? Really, the Holy Bible is found offensive, yet its removal from the seal would imply that it is. And that's the nub of the issue. And that's why so many people in town find this issue or this proposal so reprehensible, and why it wells up the emotions. A symbol is something that speaks to more than just words or logic. It is a symbol that is a very important symbol. Here, we're dealing with an historical symbol. It represents the founding settlers of this town and their ethics and their industry. It doesn't do anything to establish any single religion. It's history. It's not unconstitutional. It was designed to honor these settlers, and it should be understood as history. And history should be understood, not erased. History is facts. This proposal is nihilistic. It takes away and replaces it virtually with nothing. Now, we understand the intent, but still it's nothing. This could be, it could be the origin of the species for you know, whatever. But it's something that should be, if we're going to change our seal, uplifting and positive and inspiring. Instead, it's implicitly an affront to many people in the town, and I would propose more people than took offense with this. And in that respect, pushing this seal, pushing this change on the town is the very opposite of what the diversity task force should be about. It represents intolerance.
Okay.
I look forward to finding something that's really something that people can get behind, and not something that takes away.
You know, I think we're going to talk about lots of that, lots of what both you, John, and Deirdre have mentioned here as we go through various perspectives from the questions that viewers have sent in. A lot of what you both have talked about is going to be asked more specifically here. Let's start with some of the nuts and bolts. And this was referenced earlier, but haven't we already decided this? In fact, in the fall of 2017, the fall town meeting voted no to a somewhat similar proposal. Deirdre, you alluded a little bit to that earlier. Would you like to go into whether or not we really should be going back over this?
So we did vote that warrant down, but it was a very different warrant. It was very open-ended. It didn't have any kind of structure around the change. And this one does have a very specific structure. The 2017 warrant was going to appoint a committee, and they were going to completely overhaul the seal. People were very against that. So this is a more measured approach to making a change in the seal.
Okay. John, any thoughts on that?
I've got to say, you know, when you reject even doing establishing a committee, you are implicitly rejecting a change to the seal. And that it speaks words. It's not, you're mincing an argument here. This is something that was decided. And that's what's frustrating to a lot of people.
So the diversity task force was formed to find ways of making Groton a more inclusive community. I'm sorry, Deirdre, if I'm not repeating the charge exactly, but I think that's the spirit of it, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, great. And to make recommendations to the select board on how they could do that. And the task force made this recommendation to the select board, who saw fit to put it on the warrant. One question from the community is, was the recommendation from the diversity task force unanimous?
Yes, it was.
Was it? Okay. And then I understand you went out to various components of the community as part of your research, including the Interfaith Council, which is very interesting because it represents a group of various faiths in our town, and there are quite a surprising number for those of us who don't pay attention to this a lot. And it's wonderful that you touched base with them. What was the Interfaith Council's response?
The Interfaith Council decided not to take a vote on this subject.
Is there any background to that? Any reason why they wouldn't?
I wasn't there when this decision made. I do know that there were some people that were not in support of this, and I don't know if that had something to do with it, but ultimately there was no official vote from that committee. Okay,
so neither a yes nor a no, but basically an abstain.
Exactly.
Okay. And going to history, one of the big arguments about this revolves around history, and the one we hear most here and with symbols across the country as we talk about changing them is don't change or hide history. This was the most popular sort of question that viewers had. John, what do you think about that? I know you touched on it in your opening, but what do you think about this argument that we shouldn't change or hide history?
Yeah, this is, it's cancel culture. It's part of the movement that I think many of us have decided has gone way too far. And, again, if there was something that was positive, something that was inspiring that was being done here, you'd see people, debating it, freely and saying, we want to move forward to this new seal or something like that. But here, you're really looking at something that's negative and just something that.
But on the history side, on the history focus,
just destroying the history. It's an attempt to erase history, and virtually erasing it. And
Deirdre, how do you feel about this idea?
It's the wrong symbolic move.
Okay.
Yeah, I really feel that we took a long look at the seal in general and was very thoughtful about not destroying history. But I think the short-sightedness is that there's been history since the seal was designed until the current time. So what we're acknowledging is that Groton has changed between the time that the seal was designed and now. And we have a lot more diversity in faiths in this town. You keep saying that it's negative, and I'm thinking that if you're going to the temple in town, if you're going to that Hindu temple, you're not finding this to be negative. So I think it's a perspective thing, John. I really do. And I think that, removing it allows that book to be anything that anybody sees it as. So it can be any one of the books of faith that people follow.
Those are words. The fact is that the Holy Bible is very symbolic here, and you're specifically excising it. You're removing the Holy Bible, and that doesn't bode well. I mean, I think that.
Right. Hold on, John.
I said before, if we started out something new, it wouldn't look like this.
Yeah, we're going to get into symbolic nature in a little bit further down in the discussion, but I want to stick on the history part right now, if I could. Should a nation's symbols change as the nation itself evolves, John?
No, symbols don't change. I think that cultures change, but to take something that is acknowledged as a symbol and destroy it is not right.
But is there not a correlation between the evolution of a country and the symbols that it puts forward about itself?
Oh, yes, sure there is.
Okay.
But this is not changing a symbol. This is destroying a symbol.
Okay. Deirdre, what if we did erase history every time we have a change of public opinion? You know, I'm not saying that's what we're doing here, but there is that argument, and I'd hope that you could maybe respond to it.
The argument is that I am completely against erasing history. I am for adding history. And I know that John keeps seeing this as, you know, destroying something, but I think that what you were asking him about symbols is symbols may need to change as the population changes and the culture changes.
Okay.
Now, you can create a town now without having the reverend be the head of the town. But basically, when this town was created, they had to have a reverend to have the town of Groton, or the plantation at that point. So
Actually,
that's completely changed. So,
yeah,
you know.
It's completely changed. That's the point. You're not completely changing it here. All you're doing is you're taking something away. You're taking something away, and it's not inspiring in and of itself. You just say, well, it can be any holy book, but you're not uplifting, you're not moving people forward. You're in fact moving toward the secularization of society, and that is a bad direction to move in.
I want us to try to stay narrow on the sort of aspects that we're talking about, and we're just wrapping up the history aspect, and we're going to move on to the Establishment Clause aspect. So key to this argument when people talk about should we have this on the words Holy Bible on our seal is the idea that there should be a separation between church and state. The First Amendment to the Constitution has a clause called the Establishment Clause that touches on lots of things like freedom of the press and freedom to assemble, but it also has language that people commonly refer to as separation of church and state, but the language is basically Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And so there is basically a law that this question can be bumped up against. And so my question to each of you is, are you familiar with, and I think there is case law on both sides of this, are each of you familiar with case law that would support your positions here? John, let's start with you.
Well, I don't think there really are cases on both sides, the way I see the facts here. The lead case was the Lynch case, Lynch v. Donnelly, and there Warren Burger basically recognized that the country's religious roots were distinguished from First Amendment prescription of endorsing and establishing a religion. Justice O'Connor, Sandra Day O'Connor, felt that the let's see, what did she say? That in making this law, he says the law boils down to this: if the government act or law or proposal improperly endorses or disapproves of religion, it is unconstitutional. Here, I don't think we're talking about either of those. I just don't think it's unconstitutional.
Okay.
I don't think there's a serious case that can be made.
Deirdre, are you familiar with any case law on this that gives
Yes,
you?
I'm very familiar with. Actually, what we're looking at is the 14th Amendment, which applies the Establishment Clause down to the states. So that's what would be argued under, okay?
Okay.
And then there's a test for that. It's called the Lemon Test. It's a 3-pronged test. I'm not going into too much detail, and also I'm not a lawyer. The Lemon Test had been applied in these cases very indiscriminately. For instance, Los Angeles County had to remove a cross from their seal, even though it was a depiction of the mission there, because, you know, they decided that it failed the Lemon Test. Whereas a couple years later, Lehigh, Pennsylvania was told that the crosses on their seal were okay and did not, the Lemon Test did not apply. So it's really all over the case. There's tons of cases. I looked at cases in Albany, Alabama, California, Ohio, Wyoming, many states are dealing with these issues.
Well,
so it's not clear to me which way it would go if somebody sued us. But to be clear, that was never something that we took into consideration when we were making these decisions.
So
one
that
could
brings
make
up
the argument that this proposal is made because the Holy Bible is offensive to some people, and therefore you're taking it out. if you make that case, you've got to realize that the case law basically says if the governmental act disapproves of religion, it is also unconstitutional. So this proposal itself could be unconstitutional.
Well, we'll get to whether or not we see this as disapproving of religion in a little bit. We're going to get to that pretty quickly.
Jack, can I rebut?
Yeah, I want to really move this along, so let's keep it quick.
We never said it was offensive, John, and I said that in my opening statements. What we said, it was not inclusive. It's a very different line in the sand.
Okay. So, one way to avoid the difficult discussion that we might have here would be simply to take it to the courts. What do you think about taking this to the courts, Deirdre?
I really don't know. I mean, I know that it would be expensive for the town of Groton, and that's probably one more expense that we definitely don't need to incur. But, what would happen is we would get sued by another organization, and then we'd have to defend ourselves if we wanted to keep the Holy Bible on there. And again, I don't know what the outcome would be.
Okay. To be clear, I don't know of any argument that says take this to the courts, but it's certainly because there is this Establishment Clause issue, it is certainly a consideration. John, Deirdre talks about this. There would be potentially a liability to the town if we did this. Is that worth defending?
Well, I think that what's really the problem here is that the cost of proceeding to be foisted upon the town. I don't think there is liability for offending sensibilities. So we just have to ask ourselves, is this something that we want to avoid? And frankly, I think the case law is so strong on this that we should defend it as a matter of history and as a matter of respect for the town's history and its founders.
Okay. So moving on to more of a religious focus here. One question from viewers is, do we see the Bible as a symbol of faith in general or as a specifically Christian document? John?
I think I see it in this context as faith in general. I was surprised to see Holy Bible when I moved into town. I first realized what the town seal was. I said, boy, how did they get away with this in today's environment? But I think it really has always been endemic of symptomatic of the Christian Judaic ethic, which is not offensive, nor is it exclusive to people who are Muslim or who are Hindu or any other faith. We teach tolerance, and I think that it is more, especially on a seal like this, symbolic of the high moral standards and the ethics of the founders. And it certainly doesn't, encourage people to be Christian or even to go to church or a synagogue. I mean, it's a town seal is a town seal. We're making it overblown here.
Deirdre, I guess I know this was a big part of your initial discussion as to whether or not the book itself represents a specific faith or all faiths. So I guess I should really ask you the same question. Do you see the Bible as a symbol of faith in general? The use of the word Holy Bible as a symbol of faith in general, or as a specifically Christian term relative to our seal?
It's specifically Christian. And I think that a good test for that is to think of that book with the words Quran on it. Would you think of that as faith in general, or would you feel like it wasn't including you as a Christian? I do think it's Christian, and I think in fairness, it was from the founders who were mostly Christian. So, I get that argument, but that's why we kept faith in there, because we didn't want to destroy faith. We just wanted to say there's lots of different faiths.
Okay. This is for both of you, and this question comes from viewers, and I'm going to read the question the way it was posed, and then I'm going to try to tell you how I think, what I think they're asking, because you'll see as I read it. The question is the Bible a 19th century relic of systemic bias? And I'm not sure exactly how how I would answer or even understand that question, but let me pose it this way. Did the Diversity Task Force see an association between the Bible and bias in determining to make its recommendation? Deirdre?
So I'm not exactly sure what that question is getting to, but I think that what it's asking is, do we find it offensive? And I mean, if you say relic, that means something from the past that has some sort of value in the past. And I would definitely argue, and this is probably more a Deirdre answer than a diversity task force answer, but there are people that read the Bible all the time currently. It's not a relic at all. It's just a symbol of a group of people's faith. And yeah.
John, the question really, I think, from the viewer is about systemic bias and the Bible's association with that. Do you see that?
I don't think that question deserves an answer.
Okay. Great. Well, you know, actually, I value the fact that viewers send us their questions, and we have to recognize that these are things that people are thinking and asking themselves. And so we can certainly choose not to answer them, but these are certainly thoughts that are going on in our community and things that people are going to weigh as they make their decision on this. So, you know, in addition to the feelings on faith, this is also, obviously, it has a political overtone. And this is to both of you. Is this really just another conservative versus liberal issue, a right versus left issue, Deirdre?
So I would argue that it is absolutely not, considering I'm a very big conservative and I voted for this. But what John has alluded to, and I do understand because it's an argument that my family would make, and I know definitely some of my friends would make, is this the secularization of society, which has been thought of as more of a liberal agenda. I don't think so, because I think that this was very specific and surgical, if you will.
Okay. John? Liberal, conservative?
Part of your answer, Deirdre, was frozen, so I'm not sure I can say this, but I think I totally agree with you. This is not conservative or liberal. I've spoken with friends on both extremes, and I've gotten diverse answers. So diverse, yes, correlated with the extreme. Diversity of opinion on this fact.
Okay, so there, you know, politics is an enormous part of this, but emotion is an enormous part of this as well. And so there are quite a few questions that have come in with regard to that have to do with how people feel about this. What are the emotions around this? And so, John, this one's to you. If a significant portion of people object to a symbol, is it time to remove it or to modify it? And if so, what is that threshold? How do you know when it's time?
Boy, I just don't know how to approach that. I mean, I would turn it around and say, if a significant number of people are offended by the feigned objection of many people to it, because I think that, frankly, this is something that a lot of people feel is a make-weight issue. It's another way to get at the larger picture of a secularized society, of the whole cancel culture movement. I don't think that it's necessarily, I know that there are some people who are genuinely affronted by the Bible there, but if they're affronted because they don't understand why it was put there to begin with.
But that's not my question. The question is, if a significant portion of a society objects to something, to a symbol, is there a point at which the society is obliged to amend that symbol?
I think the time will come when something better is proposed. I don't think they're obliged to do it. Well, I don't think that there is such a thing as a tyranny of the majority. All right, I will admit to that. I don't think this is a tyranny of the majority, and I think that it has to be something that is really substantive, that affects somebody's life. That's I just don't. I see this as an issue that I think has been disposed of. Why are we here dealing with it again? We have a very vocal minority that is pushing and pushing and pushing this issue.
But we're going away from the original question, so we'll just leave it at that. Deirdre, I think you've tried to answer this, but I'm really asking it from a different perspective about, is this understandable? Is it understandable that some people feel that the effort to remove the words Holy Bible from the seal is an attack on their religion? And again, I'm not asking you if it's an attack. I'm saying, is it understandable that people feel that way?
Oh, I mean, yes, I do understand that people do feel that way. And I also understand that there are people that feel like they're not represented by Holy Bible being on that book. I also kind of want to discuss what you were discussing with John, which is the diversity task force only job is to make a recommendation to the select board. So there's now 1, 2, 3 stopgaps in between our recommendation and it actually playing out. And so the question is that the people get to vote on it in the fall if it gets through the ballot. And so the people can make that decision, and John can be answered one way or the other about whether the majority of people wanted to change this or it was a minority of people that wanted to change it. That's the great thing about having a democracy and having a town meeting, because once we get into town meeting, we are then the government. The select board is just there having done their job, and the people that get to vote are the people that are running the government. So this is a perfect example of democracy, and we can make that decision. The people can make the decision if we get it to fall town meeting.
Okay. John, again, on sort of the emotions side, to you, this is a question of, is it understandable? Is it understandable for people of different faiths or of no faith at all to object to the presence of the Bible on the seal? Is it understandable to you?
It is understandable. And I think that, as I said before, it is just as reasonable to try to, explain to people who are affronted that this was no affront was intended. And I don't think the Diversity Task Force's recommendation intentionally welled up, the type of emotions I think it has. But I think it's an unintended consequence because of the powerful symbol that is involved here.
Okay. So this one's to both of you. We're going to sort of move on to representation, which we touched on a little bit earlier, and I asked you to wait, but representation, about the seal representing us all. And this is to both of you. We heard from Joshua, virtually 100% of the people in our town in 1898, when the seal was created, were identified as Christian. And today, according to Pew, only 58% of people in Massachusetts identify as Christian. And should a seal that represents us represent only some of us? John, if you'd like to start that one, and I'll go to Deirdre after.
I think that the point is that the seal doesn't represent us, it represents history. If you want to change the seal, I think that there's a way of, maybe I'm jumping ahead to another question here, but there may come a time when this seal is retired with dignity and replaced with something more inspiring, something better, something that is representative of today's society. But that's not what we're dealing with here. That's the problem here.
But isn't the very purpose of a seal to represent us? Isn't that why we have a seal, is so we can stamp things with our seal saying this is what Groton does and says?
The purpose of having a seal is because somebody decided we had to have a seal. Nobody thought we had to have a seal until all of a sudden the law said you got to have a seal.
Okay.
I mean, contracts under seal have certain significances, but a seal is basically meaningless today.
Okay. So Deirdre, to you, just to repeat, should a seal that represents us represent only some of us?
I don't believe it should represent only some of us. I also would be careful that it has to represent each and every, person in the town. But I'm also curious about, John is getting upset about that we're destroying history by removing 9 letters off of the seal, and yet then he wants to completely remake the seal. Isn't that destroying even more history, John?
I don't want to remake the seal. I just said there may come a time when this seal is retired with dignity. It's not being retired with dignity. It's being cast into ignominy, whatever that is.
the big word. We'll look it up after.
Sorry, mess that one up. But I mean, it's being, it's not a respectful way to deal with our history by just making this 9-letter change that you're talking about.
It's sort of along the same lines. Sort of along the same lines, and touching a little bit on the church and state issue. Is it okay for my tax bill to come on a document that endorses someone else's religion or any religion at all? Let's start with John on this one. Go to Deirdre.
I don't think it endorses religion or this religion particularly. Again, the seal's a seal. I don't find it offensive. I think most people don't find it offensive. I find it a little anachronistic. If it someday is replaced with a more inspiring one that's newer, that's something to consider. But here, there's nothing wrong with it being on a tax bill. I don't think it needs to be on a tax bill. Matter of fact, I don't think it needs to be on garbage bags.
I will bet you. I know. I will bet it doesn't need to be on garbage bags. I will bet 100% that it needs to be on your tax bill, because it is a legal symbol that represents a town.
I don't think so.
All right. Well, that'd be a good one to ponder later. Deirdre, your thoughts on tax bill and a document that endorses a religion?
Well, I mean, that's exactly the question about whether it goes against the 14th Amendment and, combines church and state. I feel like that's something a court would have to decide and, and make the decision. I think, I'm not a judge, so I'm not even going to give you my opinion, but that is the question.
John, you mentioned speaking with lots of people on all sides of politics and getting a range of responses. This question is to you. Are there people not of the Christian faith that you understand still want to see the seal remain, or the words Holy Bible remain on our seal?
I really don't know, because I'm not sure what faith some of the people I spoke with were. But the thing is, I didn't take a big broad survey.
You don't ask people their religion when they tell you their really opinion. Yeah. Okay. So this is, for the most part, the end of the what's your thought on should we or shouldn't we section. A lot of great questions from viewers, and I wanted to get into some of the more practical things on this, and just your thoughts on this. Deirdre, and actually to John too, are the views on this intractable? Don't the majority of people hold a view that they'll never change on this, do you think?
Well, as you know, I started this whole discussion saying that I was one of the founders of Save Our Seal in 2017. So I would have to argue that it is not intractable, that people can change their minds, that they can shift. I think, yeah, I think you can change your mind and you can grow.
Okay. John?
I think you can change your mind. I don't necessarily think that it has anything to do with growing. I think that people can realize that maybe things have gone too far, and maybe this is just endemic of the types of negativity that we see all around our society that demeans us, that whatnot. So people that at one time wanted to change the seal might feel that this may be the wrong time. Maybe it sends the wrong message. I mean, I do agree that people can change, and but I think most people feel this. There's no real need to change our seal right now, and most of the people are pretty closed-minded to changing it. A lot of people, I think, they will.
So, Deirdre, you're probably in the best position to understand why this suggestion was made. But I think we've all come to understand it, or I hope we've all come to understand it a little bit. The question here is there another way to do this? For whatever the bottom line intention was, I don't suppose the intention was simply to take the words Holy Bible off the seal. There must have been some secondary or primary value to doing that. Is there another way of accomplishing that thing, that bottom line that you were trying to accomplish?
I think that the bottom line was to look at the seal and ask whether it was inclusive to the citizens of Groton. And we did that. I don't know how you'd do it otherwise. And I don't know how you would do it otherwise without the thoughtful analysis that we did.
Yeah, I was impressed by the degree of process that you seem to go through rather than someone having an idea and simply putting it forward. John, same question to you though. You know, I think we, as I said, understand the objective here, and maybe the objective is very narrow for you, but do you think there's another way to go about this?
Yeah, I think that the diversity task force could have socialized the idea of reconsideration of the seal and not make a specific change, and especially one that just did happen to hit a hot button. And I think that you know, there's so much, you know, that people want to do that they feel is better, and you know, sometimes, as they say, the best intentions of mice and men, the ones that mice make are better. I don't know. I mean, I think here was a well-intentioned proposal that that just missed the mark. I think that, you know, if the diversity task force really wanted to do something, it wouldn't be that made the town more diverse. It wouldn't be taking the Holy Bible away. I mean, look at the irony here. You're doing something that is, you know, you're making a uniform a seal that was uniform, that you're making that's not diverse in any way, a nondescript seal. Now it has no Holy Bible on, just an open book. I mean, how is that diverse?
So you don't.
That's not diverse. So you don't, I mean, and frankly, you know.
So you don't see another way to do this?
No, I don't. Well, I do see other ways to do this. If somebody like Green comes along and says, here, you know, here's a beautiful new seal. I think this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Gets a whole bunch of people behind it, and we you know, make a move to go forward with something. You know, that's a big thing I don't think we understand here, and that is when people are motivated positively to go forward to something that's better, something that's inspirational, something that you desire more than what you have is important. Here, you're just cutting it off. You're just saying, let's get rid of this offensive little piece of it.
Again, it wasn't offensive. It was that it wasn't inclusive.
Let me, you know, I sort of feel compelled to say this. I think that what you're talking about, John, of saying potentially, let's have a potentially new seal. Let's come up with something that might be representative of us today and see if we would adopt that. That might have been what was asked at the last town meeting.
No, I don't think that was quite asked. I think that let's get somebody to consider something, you know. But I think that if people came up with, you know, like a task force designed a new seal and said, let's move to this new seal, and let's retire the other seal with dignity instead of just rejecting it, saying it's bad, it's not inclusive, you know, bad seal, you know. That's what you're saying.
Yeah. Okay. I think the last town meeting, 2017, the question was, should we have appoint a task force to talk about changes? But anyway,
I actually have the wording for that, and it absolutely says to redesign the seal.
Okay.
You know, a task force to redesign the seal, and that's what was struck down.
Okay.
Well,
so,
I think it could have been better socialized, and the whole idea behind doing what they're doing then is the same motivation that is here, and that is that this part of the seal is viewed as being offensive.
I'll say, having been involved in lots of large town initiatives, it is really hard to socialize anything in town, really hard. That's the point of this show, is to try to get information out. But I'm not taking anything away from you, John. I think you're 100% right. But entities work really hard to try to get the word out, and public response just doesn't rise until the minute before decisions have to be made, typically.
Can I say something, Jack?
Sure, yeah.
And right now we are doing that. We are having listening sessions all throughout town to listen to what people are saying. And remember, we're not changing the seal. We are sending it out for a vote.
No,
So
you're
in the end,
proposing a specific change in the seal.
yes, a specific conservative change.
Yeah. So one other sort of question along these same lines is, how do we come together as a community after this? You know, we're going to take a vote, and the vote's going to say one argument wins and one argument loses. How do we come together after this? Deirdre?
So having been in politics, I've won and I've lost, and I've never ended up being divisive between the people that I lost to. So maybe I'm not the perfect person to answer that question. I do think that, people need to be listening to what each other are saying in town, and I do listen to you, John, and I do hear your concerns. And I think that people need to be respectful of everyone's different points of view.
Yeah.
John, same to you. How do we come together as a community after this vote?
All right, well, first off, I think the way to come together is to withdraw this proposal and take a more tactful, more respectful view of something. Do we try to inspire people and say, this is the type of seal that we want, this is such? But I think a lot of the people that I spoke to were offended that, history is being rejected here. And that seems to be a big motivator for a lot of people that I spoke to me. I mean, I think that if we don't go about saying, let's reject history, let's go to something and not away from something. That's the key. And I think this proposal is the wrong proposal at the wrong time. And it really, the proposal itself creates contention and divisiveness. There's a better way to do it.
So the question is,
if we're going to make a change, we retire the seal as it is with dignity and present something that's better, but don't just reject it.
What if we came out of this with people feeling that they had really been heard? I think that we're going to come out of this and people are going to feel like they made their point. They didn't make their point completely. They don't believe that other people heard their point. But what if we came out of this feeling like the other side heard what I had to say? I know they heard what I had to say. They voted differently, but I know they heard me. Do you think that we'd come out of this better off if we could assure that happened? John?
Sure.
That's good. It's hard to argue. Hard to argue. Can it be done?
Doc Martin answer, yes.
Yeah. Can we do it?
I don't think we can. I think this is, it's too much of a gut punch issue. I think it ought to be sidestepped. That's why I think it should be withdrawn.
Okay.
I honestly do.
Deirdre, what if we came out of this feeling like we had been heard? Do you think we'd be better off, no matter whether our side, the outcome we want, wins or loses?
I'm going to agree with John, sure, but I don't think that's going to happen. And just in this conversation, I probably have said 5 times that we didn't find Holy Bible offensive, and John kept going back to that argument. So in that way, I think that people get very entrenched and are not listening to the different sides. So
no, I Deirdre, I have to say that the whole concept came up because some people were offended. Now, were they genuinely offended? I don't know. A lot of them were. But the point is that voting to change the seal as you have proposed to change it is an implicit acknowledgement that the Holy Bible on the seal is in fact offensive. And that is why you're putting people to a Hobson's choice here. I think you should withdraw this proposal in the name of harmony and tolerance in the town, and then move on toward finding something that's really good and positive and inspiring and saying, why not this instead of this old seal? This represents us. This is better. But this is not the right type of approach.
Well, I respect your opinion, John, but I'm not somebody that sidesteps around difficult issues, and this is a difficult issue, and I think that we need to take it to the town and have the townspeople decide what they want.
But you can't tell me that this is not a question that is whether or not the Holy Bible is offensive. And I think
I've
that's
said it
offensive.
6 times or something.
But in using cold logic, that is the essence of.
I think the word, if I may, I think the word offensive, I think being offended is a response and not necessarily an intent. And I think it can happen without the intent. And I think that's what I'm hearing, is that there is no intent to offend. But it is true, and I think Deirdre has said she understands that people can be hurt by this.
Yeah, and so I think the proposal does more harm than good.
You've been very clear about that. What I want to do is I want to give each of you a minute to just sort of wrap things up in a closing argument. Deirdre opened first. So John, would you like to close first?
Yes, in the words of Nancy Reagan, just say no.
Okay. Deirdre?
Okay. I would say that Groton is not defined by one single faith, and that having the Holy Bible as an endorsement on our seal is not inclusionary. So I say vote yes.
Okay. Well, I can't think of much that I've heard about this issue that we haven't touched on here. I wish we had more time to go into some of these things, and I apologize for trying to move us along and in some cases short-circuiting conversation, but I wanted to move things along. I hope that the public feels that this was well-balanced and comprehensive. I hope that each of you, my guests, feel like you got an opportunity to say the things you wanted to say and to give the community the information you wanted to give them. I'd like to thank Noah Paul and the Groton Channel for helping to make this happen. We get such great support from the individuals at the Groton Channel, in this case Noah, and the channel itself. Without them, this just wouldn't happen. Again, I'd like to thank Deirdre and John, my guests here. You know, standing up and saying these things is not always easy, and I know that there was a lot of prep for this. So thank you very much to the two of you. I hope you found it valuable.
Thank you, Jack, for putting this together, and thank you, Deirdre, for so ably representing your point of view. You know, I just wish we had something that, you know, was not, you know, just one of these mundane issues that we had to beat around here, something that could, you know, draw some attention. But I think we did cover all of the points here on both sides, and I appreciate that.
Good. And thanks to the community for your input. Probably 80% of the questions asked came from the community, and that's wonderful. I hope that lots of people have a chance to see this. If you think it's valuable, if you see and think it's valuable, please send it on to friends. Having an informed vote, whether it's a town meeting or a ballot, is the way we get representative outcomes. So please don't hesitate to forward this presentation on to others in your groups. If you have comments on this or suggestions for what we should do next or what we can do better, please send those comments to grotonmatters@gmail.com, or there are comment sections at the website that you can use to log your opinion. So with that said, and thanks again to Noah Paul and the Groton Channel. Thank you very much for listening, and please get out and vote this May. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.